Welcome to Being Human. I'm your host, Steve Cuss.
I'm joining today Lisa Cuss.
Hey, on Being Human, we help you notice and diffuse what's going on in yourself that's getting in the way of healthy connections. We've all got coping mechanisms and reactivity and triggers that block well-being, but we don't always realize that they also block healthy relationships as well. Not just relationships with people. These triggers also tend to block our awareness of God. So on Being Human, we help you notice and name them so you can become more fully human, more human-sized. Our tendency as people is to always focus on others. We're either worried about others or we're frustrated by others. But on Being Human, we first pay attention to ourselves. We take responsibility for ourselves. We manage ourselves. And this helps us connect more deeply to others and also to God.
Have you ever noticed when or just the fact that you stop noticing God? This is very common that we can go about our daily lives, that we're in our own minds, that we're focusing so much on others, and we forget that God is present and with us, and that in that there's an invitation. So in that, it's very important to us that on this podcast, we take the time together to light a candle that helps us in a very tangible way recognize that God is present with us. And that in that, whatever is before us, whatever we are carrying, that God is light and love and involved and with. And so we do this today and invite you to join in just relaxing into the presence of God with us today.
Okay, so we had a little break on the pod, and last time we did an episode, I was sitting on the shores of the Swan River in Western Australia.
Yes.
By
with all the
myself.
sounds.
We weren't together.
Yeah. I love the birds in the background.
Oh, man. Yeah. So the Australian crow always sounds like an old man telling you off.
Yeah.
And there was a crow on that episode.
There's nothing like the birds in Australia, I have to say. Yeah. Beautiful.
So we've had quite a few weeks here around Cascasa, quite a revolving door of people. Just dropped our middle son back to the airport yesterday with his friends.
Yeah.
Tell us about the last few weeks.
Yeah, I mean, I've been thinking it's been a season of people in, guests in, which has been really exciting. Also birthdays. It has been a season of birthdays and marking moments. So we celebrated my mom's 80th in December, which was phenomenal to do with friendships. And then our daughter's 18th, we just celebrated this weekend. I think birthdays are a highlight for me. We like to take the time to do words of blessing and to ask what people have learned about themselves and about life. And that's always really rich for me just to hear. And I have to say, especially in the teen years, what they're learning about life and who they are. And really powerful.
Yeah, as our kids are sharing what they've learned this year and their values every birthday, I'm always thinking, does this mean we're good parents?
Right.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. No, but it's been really rich.
I made a trip to Western Australia, snuck one in before Christmas, and got back just in time for Christmas. We had this new dynamic in our house where our dog gets separation anxiety.
Every time he sees suitcases.
Yeah. So it used to be just suitcases. So I've learned to hide my suitcase when I pack, but now he started to chase us out into the garage.
And try to get in the car. Yeah.
It's
Poor Brody. He
dynamic.
holds it all. He needs this podcast.
He needs being golden.
Yes, being golden.
Yeah.
Perfect. All right. So as we look at this year, what do we have for the podcast 2025?
I'm really excited about this year of Being Human. Been meeting with our producers who people don't get to meet, but I've got this amazing team at Christianity Today, and we've been brainstorming. And they gave us great feedback. They just said, let's get back to the essentials and the basics for the whole year. So what we're going to do is focus on the 3 core relationships that every human being has and the 4 dynamics that infect those relationships. And that's going to be our whole year. So today we're just going to set it up briefly, and just to warn everybody, today is not designed to be like a thorough digging into all the relationships and the dynamics. I think that would actually be an overwhelming episode.
Right. Yeah.
But we will list them briefly for you. Let's start with the relationships. We teach that we have 3 core relationships, and this isn't rocket science. You have a relationship with yourself, you have a relationship with others, Of course, you have your relationship with God.
Mhm.
And let's just start with self. A lot of your work is helping people get to know themselves. And a lot of our work, this is the work we do for our own sake as well. Tell us about a relationship with yourself. What's it like? Why is it hard?
Yeah, well, I think a lot of what I do is relationship with yourself for the purpose of how
Mm,
that impacts relationship with other people and relationship with God. Honestly, a lot of my clients, people are really leery to look at the relationship they hold with themselves. I think a lot of people think it's a waste of time.
mm.
That it's not productive to look at your relationship with yourself. Or I think sometimes as believers, we grow up thinking that it's selfish
It's like
to look.
indulgent.
Yeah, it's indulgent. Like, why would we take the time to look at what's going on in us? Um, when really so much of the invitation in the Gospels is what God can do in us and around us,
Yeah,
you know?
yeah,
Um, yeah. And then it's also just hard to look at pain, you know? Like, I think
yeah,
that's my story
yeah.
right now too, is who wants to look at pain? Because I think we tend to think that if we're going to look at it, then we're going to feel it and be overcome by it and perhaps undone in an unhealthy way. But really, what we're trying to dig into is that when we can be aware of it, then we're not undone by it.
Mm.
Yeah.
I think as long as you and I have known each other, you have asked me how I'm doing. And for
Yes.
the majority of our relationship, I've just said, I'm fine. I think the last time you asked me how I was doing was last night. How are you doing? And even last night, I was like, oh, I wonder if I'm not well and I'm not aware of it,
Hmm.
which is often my situation.
Hmm.
When I think of self, I think I relate to all of the things you're saying. It's indulgent, it's selfish. Who cares how I'm doing? There's needs, there's
Hmm.
others. And it is interesting. I used to think that I was others focused because I was selfless, like I'm fulfilling the law of Christ. And
Yeah.
it has been a more recent lesson for me to realize that focusing on others is a wonderful avoidance technique.
Mm.
Yeah, you probably don't ever run into that in the
I
therapy office.
all the time. I run. Yeah. In fact, I'm realizing I get into a place where I get in an imbalance where I can, because it takes a lot of work, even in the therapy room, to be doing both, right? To be doing the line between what's going on between us,
Yep.
two people
You
sitting,
and the client,
me
for
and the
example.
client sitting in the depth, what's going on inside them, what's going vertically on with that I'm trying to be attuned to with what is God doing in this space, in the room between us, inside me, inside the other. Um, and there's times where it takes a lot of effort and that feels really exhausting. And then there's times where it's just really beautiful and
Mm.
comes together.
Mm.
Yeah.
So I'm trying an exercise right now that anytime I read in the Bible that God has the world in his hands, or anytime in the Bible it talks about like the earth or something like that. So, for example, in the Lord's Prayer, Jesus teaches us to pray that God's will be done on earth as it is in heaven.
Mm.
I'm trying a thing lately where before I think about the earth out there, I think about the earth in here. Like I'm made of dirt. Like, right? I'm made of dirt and God's image.
I like
Yeah.
that.
And
Yeah.
so that was neat with the Lord's Prayer because I pray the Lord's Prayer quite often. What really got me going is at the end of the book of Job, after all the suffering that Job went through. And God says, do you hold the earth in the palm of your hands? Because I do. Like God's kind of reminding Job of God's sovereignty.
Hmm.
And I just realized, oh man, that's a complex world that God's holding,
Yes.
just like the complex world in me that he's also holding. And that's helped me quite a lot, actually.
I mean, what a visual of God holding the dirt and the very essence of who we are,
Yeah.
um, to come back to again and again helps us not feel alone.
Yeah.
It's so empowering.
Okay, so in our core relationships, we have ourself,
Hmm.
we have others, we have God. We're going to not bury the lead here. It always comes back to self. Whatever the other relationships we're going to focus on this year, darn it, we're going to encourage you to notice what's going on in you. Let's just talk about others briefly because others is a broad category.
Yeah, because you've got the others that are close to you,
Hmm.
and the people that you love, and dare I say, are easier to love.
Hmm.
And then you've got the others that might be a little bit beyond, or because of things going on in their life or various things, are more difficult
Yeah,
to love.
yeah,
So it gets
it
complicated.
does. Yeah. So we talk about your precious people. We
Mm-hmm.
talk about difficult people.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously, as a former pastor, that was a lot of my work, was figuring out how to navigate difficult people.
Yeah.
And then the third category is people in difficulties.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess we would just broadly say that's people in systemic poverty, people that the gospel compels us to go serve and help,
Yes.
but also just people who are carrying a lot. And
Mm-hmm.
really, a lot of the work you and I do is people in difficulties.
Yes.
Yeah. So, what's it like to help people in difficulties?
Well, it's a broad
Big
question.
question. Yeah. I ask and then I just see what you're going to say.
Yeah. Um, I I think what helps me is to realize that when we're working with people in difficulties, that there's some parts of their stories that we may never understand, and yet there are human longings that we share that are difficult. So I find it broadens my faith to work with people in difficulty, and that I also can find myself, even if it's to a less extreme, in their story and in their longings. So,
Yeah.
in some ways, it can be really connecting to dive in,
Yeah.
and really intimidating at the same time.
Yeah. The reason we take this group of others and we kind of break it down is I think with difficult people or people in difficult situations,
Hmm.
I think the human tendency is to either avoid that or get all wrapped up in it.
Yeah.
And there is like a middle ground of connecting.
Hmm.
I think I used to tend to avoid it by trying to take their difficulty down to two dimensions that was more simple to manage. I'm
Hmm.
thinking back to when I was a crisis intervention pastor in Las Vegas. People would come in off the street with all this complexity, oftentimes generational poverty or deep systemic issues. And because of my anxious need to fix, it's like I would avoid them by simplifying their problem.
Yes.
And I didn't realize that was for my protection. I always thought it was for them, to give them advice or, hey, here's what you can do. It takes energy to connect to somebody in complexity without trying to fix it.
Well, and I think the human brain naturally is wired to make sense of everything, and therefore to fix, because if we have the ability to fix, then we can make sense of it.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's where my concept of God has really grown, is acknowledging that there are some things that I will never understand
Mm.
and never be able to fully see. And to be able to be with someone in the midst of that is also, it's a piece of faith that God knows and sees and holds.
Yeah.
And I don't have to understand fully, but I can
Yeah.
still connect.
Okay. So we have our relationship with ourself, what's going on in me. And this whole year, we'll be helping you focus on how am I infecting or being infected by the dynamic and how can I manage that? We have relationship with others, which is obviously a broad category. So that's our precious people, difficult people, people in difficulties. Um, what's interesting is sometimes I think people might hear our work and say, oh, you often step out of the burden of life to take care of yourself. But what's actually true is you and I have obligations.
Mhm.
Like maybe you have a counseling client that you have to meet whether you feel like it or not, whether you're well or not. I think about all the times I preached, regardless of how I was feeling. It might just be helpful to pause and say, what do you and I do to notice myself and go in anyway, even if I'm not well? I'm
Yes.
happy to go first. The late Tony Campolo had this wonderful saying, it's Friday, but Sunday's coming, right? It was
Yes.
one of his most famous sermons. And of course, that sermon's meant to be good news. No matter how bad life is, resurrection's coming. That was the point. But for a preacher, that phrase is a bit of a curse. Like it's Friday, which is often your day off. But
Sunday's
oh no,
coming, which feels
Sunday's
like a lot
coming.
of
Like,
work.
oh man.
Yeah.
And oftentimes I would walk out to that pulpit just not well.
Hmm.
But I can't get out in front of my congregation and say, I've been paying attention to myself. I'm not well. We're all not hearing a sermon today, which I'm sorry to say, as I think about it, some people would have appreciated that 30 minutes off. But so what I would do is I would take a moment, it usually take 1 to 3 minutes, and just connect to God and just be reminded that I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. And then I would walk out remembering that I'm not alone, that God's with me.
Mm-hmm.
I bring that up because I think the tendency could be to say, well, I'm not well, let me get well before I go in and do the difficult thing. But that's not really what we're teaching people to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I appreciate that. I love your vulnerability of what it's like for a pastor that, Sunday's coming, which should bring hope.
Yeah.
And often that means, my vulnerability is right there
Yeah.
for everyone. I think I'm noticing I have layers of not being well, and that when I'm in my head only, that's when I try to push through on my own.
Mm.
And it's very easy for me to forget that God is with me, and that and I can go into fix it mode. And man, I notice it, and it's hard to get out of that when I'm in fix it mode. When I feel like I'm going to get emotional, when I feel not well and it's deeper, it's like a pit in my stomach, or it's a body sensation. It's like it becomes a gift that that I have to move with God. Like I have to ground.
Physically
I
move.
physically have to move. I physically have to ground and be reminded of the bigness of God and the appropriate smallness so that I can continue. So man, there's been times for me when I'm running on fumes, and it's like a core sense in my body.
Mm.
And usually those days when I can acknowledge that and completely open myself up to, I am running on fumes, but God, you are not,
Mm.
And you are doing something here. They're usually powerful days.
Yeah.
When I am running on fumes, but I'm in my head, I continue to just be on a treadmill of getting stuck.
Yeah, and you can kind of notice the doom. It takes a while,
Uh-huh.
but you kind of feel that sense of doom and everything's bigger than it is. That's kind of a sign that you've forgotten the Lord, I think.
Yes.
Yeah. So the vision we have for being human
Mhm.
is actually this work of noticing yourself deepens your capacity for difficulties.
Yes.
That's the goal.
Yeah.
It's not that you end up in some hot tub at some retreat getting a spa massage your whole life. It's actually the opposite. It's your capacity to step into situations aware of yourself so that you can be more aware of what's really going on
Yes.
and not just kind of running on fumes. And that leads us to the final relationship, the relationship with God.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just going to say, because we'll be tackling these relationships all year, I've actually learned this from you. Connecting to myself first before trying to connect to God has been more fruitful for me than just connecting to God first. It's almost like if I'm not aware of myself, that's my default, that I'm not aware, then it's like I'm trying to take a disconnected self to God, and then the whole
Yes.
thing feels a bit disconnected. Whereas when I'm aware of what's going on in me, and there's almost always a little volcano down there, now I've got a lot to give to God, and it's quite
Yeah.
a rich exchange.
Yes. I've been playing with just even where's our posture and our head in this?
Yeah.
And I think personality wise, we all have a tendency that our head will either be down, gazing at the navel too much,
Right.
or
Introspection.
but get stuck there to where
Mhm.
you forget to lift thine eyes and look up. So we have the posture of kind of the head really far down, microscopically looking. We've got the posture of the head straight up to God, but never looking down, which also is a sense of avoidance, where
Mm.
we're only looking up, um, but forget ourselves. We miss like a depth of who God is when we do that. And then there's the looking around, that we're looking around at others, at the world, combined with looking up with what God's doing. And that I feel like there's a posture that we all might tend to get stuck in.
Yeah.
And there's a beauty in just naming that, man, if I get stuck looking down, then what I want to do today is practice just lifting my head to look up.
Mm.
Or if I get stuck looking around at others, but never at how it's impacting me or my own complicity, I'm also missing out on what God might be doing.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's just something I'm
I
playing
like
with.
that. That's really powerful. So people this year can just pay attention to their posture. And I don't know if for our audience, if things are connecting for you, as I was listening to you, I was thinking about, okay, the person that only ever looks up thinks they're really spiritual maybe,
Yes.
or they say, well, my relationship with God is fine, so nothing else matters. Meanwhile, they're maybe not well with others and they're, causing trouble, but they believe because they only ever look up that things are fine.
Yeah, I think when you're only looking up, it's easier to diminish the other's experience
Yeah, right.
and lose empathy.
Right.
There's hope.
I like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then I also like I have fallen into the trap of only ever looking around. I can't be well if you're not well with me. If you're not well
Right.
with each other, I can't be well. And I'm looking around. I'm going to have
Yes.
to, all right.
We'll play with it.
I'm going to sit
Yep.
on that. That's really helpful. Okay. So there's the 3 core relationships all year: self, others, God.
Mhm.
Really simple. But now we have the dynamics, and we will list the dynamics for you. There's 4 core dynamics we're going to be focusing on this year. But listen, here's the big idea. We think your relationships can be transformed if you spend as much attention on the dynamic as the person. It's that simple. In other words, don't just focus on God, focus on the dynamic between you and God. Don't just focus on others, focus on the dynamic between you and others. And I have to finish it. As you focus on yourself, pay attention to the dynamic. So a dynamic in my life, I have had to learn to be as kind to myself as I am to others. It's really simple. But I had a dynamic where I'm very kind to others. I'm very harsh to myself. It was predictable. I noticed it. And when I worked on that dynamic, my relationship with myself improved. Yeah. All right. So which one want to play the fabulous game of listing the 4 dynamics? Do you want to?
You go for it. You're
I
on
will.
it. Yes.
Okay. The 4 dynamics that infect every relationship. Number 1, assumptions. Number 2, reactivity. Number 3, predictable recurring patterns, like my pattern to be unkind to myself. Number 4, attempted solutions, one of my personal favorites. Let's just talk about assumptions today.
Well, and all of these intertwine.
They do intertwine.
So we're going to talk about really just one today, but really we could talk about all 4 based in one, but we want to keep it concrete.
Yeah, we don't want to go heavy in this episode. We just wanted to list them. And then we have guests all year. And as I engage with a guest, I'll be inviting them to look at one of these dynamics and we'll be bantering it around. So you've got all year to kind of get to know them. But assumptions, boy, they're slippery, aren't they? They're tricky to notice.
Well, they're tricky to notice because we treat them often as reality.
We just assume it's reality.
We assume that it's reality. And so we don't, it keeps us from pausing to even be curious or question or... So for me, one of my assumptions even this weekend is that pain shouldn't stop me, whether that's physical pain or emotional pain. I think behind that is I should be able to cope better. Therefore, it shouldn't stop me,
I will just say as your spouse, it's always amazing to me with the kinds of clients you work with in trauma, how you do struggle to realize, I've had a heavy day.
Yeah.
So you'll often come home with 5 or 6 clients I don't know what they're talking to you about, but it's not light. No one goes to a trauma therapist because they're just wanting to have a cheerful time. And yet you will come home feeling like I should have more energy. So it's interesting to hear you say that.
Yeah. There's a lot of should haves and what we should be able to handle or what I should be able to handle So this weekend, I think we were birthday mode and it helps me to look at the physical, I think, just because the physical is more easy. So I was peeling potatoes for making homemade curly fries, which are the best.
Right.
And better, we've noted, in the air fryer than in the oven.
Yeah, don't do them in the oven if they're homemade.
Oh my gosh, yeah, so much better in the air fryer.
Yeah.
So I'm peeling 15, 20 potatoes and in a hurry and going and tag on it, the peeler got my finger.
Yeah, you peeled your finger.
And so it was, there's still a little symbol of it. And at first, it hurt like crazy, but at first there was no sign of anything. And so even in me was like, man, it shouldn't be this painful because I don't see any blood, So I kept going, even though I'm in pain. And then all of a sudden I had to throw a potato out because the blood starts going.
It was a red potato.
It's a red potato. Yeah. So then I have to, right, take the time and I go and I just try to blot it with paper towel. well, that it starts really coming. And so then I'm realizing I have to take the time. I look at it, I see it's like 3-dimensional cut. I have to apply pressure just to get the blood to stop. And this is like 20, 25 minutes out of my potato wing,
Yeah.
which slows us down. But I have to, because if I don't, I'm going to bleed all over our food. I'm going to bleed all over people. It's really gross, right? But somehow I can take the time physically for myself because I don't want that sight to be in others' food, or on people. But when we have the wounds ourselves, somehow for me, I shouldn't take the time at times, or I shouldn't acknowledge how much it's been. And I still end up bleeding, in quotes, all over people in other ways or all over myself.
Yeah.
But it's not as tangible or visible, so we don't take the time to do it. But I was even noticing like physical wounds. So then when I'm washing my hair, it's another reminder, right? Because you've got shampoo going into a wound, and you've got to look at when you put air on it and when you cover it up and when you tend to it or be more tender. And the truth is that we have assumptions that maybe with emotional pain, or at least mine is, that I should be able to get over it more quickly. But just as a physical wound takes time, that we have an invitation to take time within ourselves for our own pain that helps us then empathize with others.
Yeah, I
as
really
well.
like that. As I'm listening to your story, what comes to mind is a way that you can notice your assumptions is when you keep running into yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, you're kind of talking about that, like you keep running into emotional pain again and again, and your attempted solution just to press down, or I shouldn't feel that.
Yep.
So that might be helpful for our audience is where have you run into yourself in 2024?
Right.
That maybe this year you want to try a different path. And it does involve, it's inefficient work and it involves bravery. An assumption I'm working on right now that I think is going to be really challenged because I've just enrolled in a doctorate. So I'm taking on, I don't know, I think it's about 20, 25 hours a week of extra work, is I find that any mundane task feels to me like I'm now behind.
Yes.
And so I think I always feel behind. Like that's just my assumption is that there's
You
always—
wake up in the morning feeling behind.
there's so much to do and I'm already behind and I've got to get at it. And so just something mundane that's inefficient, like later today, you and I probably have to pick a car up from the mechanic. And my brain says, oh,
What a waste of time.
Is there another way? Because that's lost doctorate work or something. What's interesting about me is if I'm not careful, I actually flip into wild inefficiency because I'm so overwhelmed by all that has to be done that I just kind of shut down. So that's an assumption I'll be working on this year. And I'm sorry to say what I need to do is make sure I have more mundane experiences to break my assumption. It's a little scary.
It's interesting because I caught you saying that the work is inefficient, but our assumption is that it's inefficient.
Yes.
Because it takes time and it's not like there's a productivity checklist with it. But what is also true is over time, we notice it and there's a lightness and a depth that comes and it does become efficient.
Yeah, I noticed last year, or we noticed together, I really struggled to take 24 hours off.
Yes.
And so toward the end of the year, I really worked on that. But it's overcoming my assumption that, oh no, now I'm going to have even more to do instead of what's really true. Now I'm more refreshed to tackle all that there is to do.
I'm energized. Yep.
Okay, so then this year, lots of guests. Lisa and I will come on once in a while and reflect on our guests and pull out some of the lessons we've learned from our guests on the 3 core relationships, the 4 dynamics that infect our relationships.
Yeah, we're going to be coming on to even talk about how your guests have impacted us.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah, and pull things out, which is going to be fun to chat about.
Yeah, and coming up soon, just to give you a little sneak peek, Zach Meerkrebs.
Oh, so good.
I so enjoyed chatting with Zach. I think he's our next episode. He's the young preacher that launched the Asbury Revival. An amazing conversation with Zach. We have Ian Cron coming out. I know he's famous for Enneagram. He's lesser known for addiction.
Yes.
And he just wrote a book called The Fix. and it's addiction based. I think conversation with Ian's going to be really powerful.
I'm looking forward to that.
He's such a great thinker. Kathleen Smith,
Yeah.
she's probably my favorite systems theorist, and it's because she's so playful. So she'll be coming on, lots of other guests as well. And you can play along as our audience. You can be listening. You can be thinking about your core relationships and which dynamic you want to notice. Now, if you want to do some extra work, I happen to have, as we move into like little infomercial mode, I happen to have 2 books that will help you with this. For your human relationships, my first book, Managing Leadership Anxiety, that's the one that really helps you notice what's going on in you and what's going on between you and others. But my most recent book, The Expectation Gap, the tiny vast space between our beliefs and our experience of God, that one's really focused on learning what's going on in you and how that's infecting your enjoyment of the God you believe in. So for those who want to get ahead a little, you could pick up one or both of these books. The first half of the year, we're really focusing on us and God.
Yes.
The second half of the year, we're really focusing on our human relationships. But that's being human this year.
Yeah, so good. You know what's been really fun for me is because people, when I counsel people, they often know that we're connected. I've had some people order The Expectation Gap without me talking about it just because of my last name.
Yeah.
And it's been a great guide to go alongside counseling as well. So that's been a fun perk that I hadn't thought of. Yeah.
Yeah, it's been fun.
Proud of you.
I did an Expectation Gap workshop in Perth, and we had a great time helping people. It's just talking about the things that are under the surface in our faith that are keeping our enjoyment of God blocked. So, okay, folks, that's being human. We look forward to you joining us through the year. As always, you can really do us a solid by either leaving a written review of how maybe we've benefited you, or especially this year, maybe you'd share an episode that you think would help people. So even as we're getting our year underway, maybe you've got some resolutions, maybe some of your resolve this year is around your relational well-being. Why don't you send this episode to someone that you think it might benefit? Or maybe you could send it to someone that really annoys you.
Either way could be a win.
Yeah.
That's right.
We look forward to seeing you next time.